My father laughed before the champagne even settled in the glasses. It wasn't loud, but it carried sharp and practiced the kind that invites other people to join before they've decided whether they should. He rested his hand on my shoulder not gently and said, "This is my oldest daughter. She never really did much, just went off and joined the military." A few guests chuckled politely. Someone at the table smiled too quickly. My sister froze mid-breath in her white dress. And then the groom's father stopped chewing, stared at me, and whispered, "Wait, I know her." The room didn't fall silent all at once. It folded into silence like a flag lowered slowly until no one moved at all. The reception hall smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, the kind of place that tries to look timeless by copying something older than itself. The chandeliers were low enough to feel warm, but high enough to make everyone sit straighter. My sister had chosen soft ivory tablecloths, simple centerpieces, nothing loud. She said she wanted the day to feel calm. She'd always preferred calm. Even when we were children, she smoothed arguments the way you smooth wrinkles from a dress, quietly, carefully hoping no one would notice the crease had ever been there. I sat near the end of the family table, close enough to hear everything, far enough to be overlooked. Habit more than intention. The chair was slightly uneven, one leg shorter than the others. I adjusted it with my heel until it steadied. My hands rested in my lap, fingers loosely folded, breathing measured. I'd spent years learning how to exist in rooms without disturbing them. My father had always mistaken that for smallness. He was in high spirits. Weddings did that to him. They gave him an audience, a structure he understood, speeches, introductions, roles neatly defined. He liked roles. He liked knowing who stood where. My sister was the bride, easy. The groom, a polite young man with careful manners, approved. And me, the eldest daughter who had drifted into something he never quite understood, simplified into a joke. "She's always been independent," he continued, lifting his glass as if delivering a punchline. "Never cared for normal life, just disappeared into the army. We don't see her much." A few guests laughed again, softer this time. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was uncertain, looking for permission. I didn't look up. I watched the condensation slide down my glass instead. There are moments when correcting someone feels like striking a match in a room full of paper. I'd learned not to light anything unnecessarily. Across from me, the groom's father, Mr. Whitaker, had stopped moving. He was a tall man, older posture, still sharp, despite the softness age adds around the edges. His suit fit like something he'd worn for years, not tailored for the occasion, but chosen for familiarity. He wasn't smiling. His eyes moved from my face to my hands, then back again. He leaned slightly forward as if trying to see me more clearly without making a scene. My father didn't notice. He rarely noticed when attention shifted away from him. "She never talks about what she does," he added. "Probably paperwork. That's what most military jobs are, right?" My sister's smile flickered. She glanced at me, then at the groom. The groom shifted in his chair, polite uncertainty settling over him. I could almost hear him calculating how to respect both families without stepping into something deeper. "I keep busy," I said quietly. My father chuckled. "Busy, that's one way to put it." Mr. Whitaker set down his fork. The sound was small, but it landed with unusual clarity. "Which branch?" he asked. "Army," I answered. My father waved a hand. "Nothing glamorous. She's always liked organization." Mr. Whitaker didn't laugh. He looked at the way I sat, spine straight without effort. He noticed the scar along my wrist, half hidden by my sleeve. His gaze lingered, not intrusive, just observant. The kind of attention that measures rather than judges. "You've deployed?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yes, sir." My father shifted, slightly uncomfortable now. "Everyone deploys these days, don't they?" The groom's father didn't respond immediately. He studied my face, searching for something that had nothing to do with introductions. The conversation around us thinned. Guests sensed something, though they couldn't name it yet. My sister adjusted her napkin, her hands moving faster than necessary. The bride's bouquet rested nearby, white flowers already beginning to soften at the edges. "You coordinated something," Mr. Whitaker said slowly, more to himself than to me. My father laughed again, lighter, forced. "Coordinated? She coordinates family holidays about once every 5 years." No one joined that laugh. I felt the familiar warmth rise at the base of my neck, not anger, just awareness. My father wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to simplify me. He'd always done that. Complexity made him uneasy. Titles he understood. Quiet responsibility he didn't. Mr. Whitaker leaned back slightly, but his eyes didn't leave me. "Have we met?" he asked. "I don't believe so," I replied. He nodded slowly, though he didn't seem convinced. The room filled again with soft chatter, but it was thinner now, like sound traveling through fog. My father lifted his glass, satisfied the moment had passed. He began telling a story about my sister as a child, how she'd organized her dolls into wedding rehearsals. Laughter returned, cautious but real. I let the conversation drift over me. Weddings are built on repetition stories, retold roles reaffirmed. My sister laughed at the right places, her shoulders finally relaxing. The groom reached for her hand. The band tuned quietly near the stage. Everything resumed its expected rhythm. Except Mr. Whitaker kept glancing at me as if memory hovered just beyond reach. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stilled. He seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. My father leaned toward him. "She's always been quiet," he said, almost apologetic now. "Not like Claire." Mr. Whitaker didn't look away from me. "Quiet doesn't mean small," he replied. My father smiled politely, uncertain how to respond. The comment hung in the air, gentle but firm. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my lips. The music began softly, piano notes drifting through the room. Somewhere behind us, a chair scraped. Someone stood. My sister laughed again, brighter this time, relieved. My father relaxed, believing the moment had passed. He reached for the bread basket, offering it around the table. Then Mr. Whitaker leaned forward once more, his voice low but clear. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm almost certain. I've heard your voice before." My father chuckled, ready to deflect again, but this time no one laughed with him. The room didn't stop. It slowed like a tide, pulling back before anyone notices the water has moved. And in that space, the first thread of recognition began to tighten. The music drifted back in, gentle and careful, as if the band sensed the room had shifted and didn't want to push too hard against it. My sister leaned toward her new husband, whispering something that made him smile, but her eyes kept flickering toward me, and then toward his father. My own father returned to his bread, slicing it with deliberate calm, the way he did whenever he wanted to restore order without admitting anything had changed. Weddings are supposed to flatten history. They place everyone in neat rows, polish the past into anecdotes, and offer the illusion that families have always fit together cleanly. But sitting there, I felt the older shape of things beneath the tablecloth, years of small misunderstandings, layered quietly over each other like folded maps no one bothered to open again. My father had never known what to do with me. Claire, my sister, moved easily through rooms. She laughed when people expected laughter. She asked questions that made others feel interesting. When she was 12, she memorized the names of every guest at our neighbor's anniversary party and thanked each of them personally. My father had watched her with visible pride. "She knows how to connect," he'd said. I had been outside that same evening, adjusting the loose hinge on the gate because it squeaked when the wind shifted. I preferred knowing how things worked to knowing what to say. My father saw that as distance. He never understood that it was attention. When I joined the army, he didn't argue. He just went quiet. Silence was his way of disapproval, firm, contained, hard to push against. At the time, I mistook it for acceptance. It took years to realize he had simply decided not to engage with something he couldn't categorize. "You'll probably be behind a desk," he'd said once, carefully neutral. "Maybe," I'd replied. He nodded, relieved. "That's safer." I didn't correct him then. I rarely corrected him. It wasn't that I feared disagreement. It was that I didn't need him to understand in order to do the work. Understanding felt optional. Duty did not. Across the table now, Claire's laugh softened into something more natural. The tension eased, but not entirely. Mr. Whitaker remained thoughtful, occasionally glancing toward me. My father pretended not to notice, though his posture stiffened whenever their eyes crossed. "You must be proud," Mr. Whitaker said, finally turning to my father. "Of course," my father replied quickly. "She's disciplined." It wasn't quite pride. It was acknowledgement trimmed to something manageable. "She's always been independent," he added. "Hard to keep track of." I watched the condensation gather again on my glass. Independence had always been his polite word for distance. He had preferred closeness defined by routine weekly calls, holiday visits, predictable roles. My life didn't follow that rhythm. Deployments cut time into irregular pieces. Silence wasn't absence, it was often the only thing possible. Claire reached for my hand briefly under the table, a small squeeze that said she was trying to hold the room together. I returned it gently. She had always been the bridge between us. "So what do you do exactly?" she asked, carefully casual. "Planning," I said. My father smiled, relieved at the simplicity. "See paperwork." I let that sit. The truth rarely benefits from immediate correction. Planning, after all, did involve paper maps, schedules, briefings. He wasn't entirely wrong, he just didn't see what those papers held. Mr. Whitaker leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly in concentration. "Planning," he repeated. "Operational. Sometimes?" My father shifted in his chair. "Nothing classified, I assume," he joked. I met Mr. Whitaker's gaze. "Nothing I'd discuss here." He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that felt less like curiosity and more like respect. The conversation moved on, but the weight of it lingered. I remembered another dinner years earlier when I'd come home unexpectedly between deployments. My father had asked how long I'd be staying. "A few days," I'd said. He'd nodded, then asked if I could help reorganize the garage. We spent the afternoon moving boxes. He never asked where I'd been. I never volunteered. We worked side by side, comfortable in the silence, but something unsaid hung between us like unfinished instructions. Later, he'd told Claire she's good with logistics. It was meant as praise. It sounded like limitation. Back in the reception hall, the waitstaff began clearing plates. Glasses clinked softly. The band shifted into a slower melody. My father relaxed, believing the moment of scrutiny had passed. He began recounting a story about my sister's college graduation, how she'd nearly tripped walking across the stage. Guests laughed politely. Mr. Whitaker listened, but his attention drifted. He watched how I observed the room, the exits, the spacing between tables, the movement of servers carrying trays. It wasn't conscious anymore. It was habit. Years of reading environments had shaped my focus. I noticed his noticing, and for a moment our awareness overlapped. "You've been out recently?" he asked. "Yes." "Overseas?" I nodded slightly. My father interjected, half joking. "She never says where. We just assume somewhere dusty." A few guests smiled. The remark sounded harmless, but it skimmed over years of work reduced to atmosphere. I didn't respond. There's a point where correction becomes performance. I preferred stillness. Claire's eyes softened. "She writes sometimes," she offered. "Postcards." My father chuckled. "No return address." "They get where they need to go," I said quietly. Mr. Whitaker studied me again, as if that sentence confirmed something forming in his memory. He tapped his fingers once against the table, then stilled them. The room filled with laughter from another table. The bride and groom were called for their first dance. As everyone turned toward the floor, my father leaned closer to me. "You could try smiling more," he whispered, not unkindly. "People think you're uncomfortable." "I'm not," I replied. He nodded, misunderstanding again. "You've always been serious." The lights dimmed slightly. My sister stepped onto the dance floor, her dress catching the soft glow. The room quieted, attention shifting away from us. My father relaxed further, believing the tension had dissolved. But Mr. Whitaker didn't look at the dance. He kept his eyes on me, searching the edges of memory, as if the music itself was stirring something he couldn't quite place. And slowly the past he carried began to surface. The first dance gave everyone something to look at, something safer than the quiet tension still lingering at our table. My sister moved carefully, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder, the two of them swaying more than dancing. The band played softly, the melody simple and slow. Guests leaned in their chairs, smiling, relieved to return to the expected rhythm of a wedding. But Mr. Whitaker didn't watch the dance, he watched me. Not openly, not rudely, the way someone observes a detail they don't want to lose. His eyes moved once to the exits, then back to me. I recognized the pattern immediately. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. I'd seen it before, rooms where introductions didn't matter, where posture spoke louder than names. People who had spent time in uncertain places developed a quiet shorthand. We noticed how others held stillness, how they tracked movement without appearing to. It wasn't something you learned in a manual, it settled into your bones over time. "You mind if I ask you something?" he said quietly. I shook my head. "Go ahead." "You left-handed?" I blinked, slightly surprised. "Sometimes." He nodded as if confirming something small but important. My father leaned back, puzzled. "What kind of question is that?" Mr. Whitaker smiled politely. "Just noticing." My father laughed softly. "She's always been observant. Probably comes from me." I didn't respond. Mr. Whitaker's gaze shifted briefly to my wrist again, the faint scar catching the chandelier light. He noticed the way I adjusted my chair without looking down, the way my eyes flicked to the dance floor, then to the door, then back. These weren't dramatic movements. They were subtle enough most people never registered them. "You track the room," he said. "I pay attention," I replied. My father waved a hand. "She's always done that, used to rearrange the dinner table so she could see both doors." "That's practical," Mr. Whitaker said. My father smiled, not catching the shift, or paranoid. I felt the familiar stillness settle in my chest. It wasn't defensive, just grounded. My sister turned slowly under the lights, her dress catching the glow. Guests applauded softly as the song ended. The band transitioned into something livelier. Chairs scraped, people stood. The room breathed again. Mr. Whitaker leaned slightly closer. "Planning," he repeated almost to himself. "Yes." "Operational planning." "Sometimes." My father sighed lightly. "You're making it sound more complicated than it is." Mr. Whitaker didn't answer him. He kept his eyes on me. "You've coordinated evacuations." The question hung there. It wasn't accusatory, it was precise. My father chuckled. "Evacuations from what family reunions?" No one laughed this time. The space between us tightened, thin but real. "I've worked on movement plans," I said carefully. Mr. Whitaker nodded slowly. "High-pressure environments." "Yes." My father shifted in his chair. "Everyone in the military deals with pressure." "That's true," Mr. Whitaker agreed, "but not everyone sounds calm when they talk about it." I felt my sister glance at me again. The groom stood nearby, greeting relatives, unaware of the quiet shift still unfolding at our table. The lights dimmed slightly and waiters began clearing glasses. Mr. Whitaker's fingers rested on the table still now. "Have we spoken before?" he asked. "I don't think so." "Over comms, maybe?" My father frowned. "Comms." "Communications," Mr. Whitaker clarified. My father nodded, trying to follow. "Right, radios." The word radios lingered. Mr. Whitaker leaned back, eyes narrowing, as if replaying something in his mind. His posture straightened slightly, almost unconsciously. The kind of adjustment that comes when memory aligns with recognition. "You ever brief joint operations?" he asked. "Yes." My father laughed softly, almost nervous now. "You're interrogating her." Mr. Whitaker smiled politely. "Just conversation." The music swelled as more guests joined the dance floor. My sister laughed, finally relaxed. The bride's mother wiped her eyes. The room felt warm again. But at our table, something quieter continued. Mr. Whitaker studied my face, searching for confirmation beyond words. "Your voice," he said slowly. "It's steady." "I try to be." "You speak like someone who expects people to listen." "I speak clearly." My father shook his head lightly. "She's always been serious." Mr. Whitaker nodded, but his eyes stayed on me. "Serious keeps people alive." The sentence landed softly, but it changed the air. My father didn't respond. He reached for his glass, then set it down again without drinking. I remembered the first time someone had told me that tone mattered more than volume. It had been during a night exercise, radios crackling, uncertainty everywhere. Calm wasn't optional, it was contagious. If you held it, others followed. If you lost it, everything unraveled. Mr. Whitaker leaned forward again. "You ever work with Kandahar operations?" he asked. The question was almost casual, but precise enough to narrow the world. "Yes," I said. My father blinked. "That's in Afghanistan, right?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Didn't know that." "I don't talk about locations," I replied. Mr. Whitaker's gaze sharpened. "Northern Corridor." I didn't answer immediately. Silence sometimes says enough. He inhaled slowly. His eyes moved across my face again, then down to my hands. He seemed to be fitting pieces together, each one small but forming a clearer picture. My father shifted, uncomfortable now. "You're making her sound like something out of a movie." "No," Mr. Whitaker said quietly. "I'm recognizing someone." The band paused between songs. For a brief moment, the room filled with only low conversation. My sister stepped away from the dance floor, laughing with her husband. She didn't see what was unfolding at our table. Mr. Whitaker leaned back, his expression thoughtful, but no longer uncertain. The recognition was close now, just beyond words. He looked at me, not as a guest, but as someone he had encountered in a different context entirely. "I remember," he said softly. My father laughed lightly, trying to dissolve the tension. "You remember what?" Mr. Whitaker didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed fixed, steady, respectful. The kind of look soldiers exchange when memory finally aligns with truth. And the room, though still filled with music and movement, began to narrow around that quiet realization. The music started again, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another room. Mr. Whitaker didn't move. He sat with the stillness of someone who had reached a conclusion and was deciding whether to say it out loud. My father shifted in his chair, uncomfortable in a way he couldn't name. He glanced toward the dance floor, toward the bar, toward anything that might return the evening to something familiar. "You remember what he asked again, trying for casual?" Mr. Whitaker didn't look at him. He looked at me. His voice when he spoke was quiet enough that only our table could hear. "You coordinated the northern evacuation," he said. The words landed without drama, but they rearranged the space between us. My father blinked, unsure what he'd just heard. I kept my hands folded, my breathing steady. I didn't confirm or deny. Sometimes recognition doesn't require either. "I'm sorry," my father said, forcing a small laugh. "Evacuation from where?" Mr. Whitaker exhaled slowly. "Kandahar, 2 years ago. Weather closed in early, communications unstable. They pulled units out overnight." He paused. The voice guiding that operation sounded exactly like hers. My father looked at me, then back at him. That's a big assumption." "It is," Mr. Whitaker agreed, "but I don't forget voices like that." The groom had returned to the table now, his jacket unbuttoned, his expression relaxed from the dance. He sensed something immediately, the way people do when conversation tightens unexpectedly. "Everything okay?" he asked. His father nodded slightly. "Just talking." The groom glanced at me politely. "Dad was in logistics support for years," he explained. "He remembers operations." "Not logistics," Mr. Whitaker corrected gently. "Coordination." The groom's posture shifted, subtle but noticeable. He looked at me more carefully now, as if the introduction had changed. My father laughed again, softer this time. "You're giving her too much credit." Mr. Whitaker didn't respond to him. There was a call, he continued, speaking more to me than to anyone else. Late, calm, no wasted words. She said, "Move in sequence. Don't rush. The storm will hide you." He paused, searching my face. I remember thinking, whoever that was, she understood fear without feeding it. The room around us continued its gentle celebration. Glasses clinked, someone laughed near the bar, but at our table the air tightened like the moment before rain. My father shook his head lightly. "You're remembering someone else. I might be," Mr. Whitaker admitted, "but I don't think so." The groom leaned forward slightly. "Dad, are you saying—" Mr. Whitaker nodded once. "I'm saying she sounds exactly like the officer who planned that extraction." My father's smile faltered. He looked at me again, searching for denial. I offered none. Silence has its own gravity. "That was a big deal?" the groom asked. Mr. Whitaker's eyes softened. "My son was on that route," he said quietly. The groom froze. "What?" "You never knew the name," Mr. Whitaker continued. "Most didn't. But we were told the plan came from a senior officer who stayed on comms until the last vehicle cleared." He inhaled slowly. That voice stayed with me. My father's hand tightened around his glass. "You're saying she—" "I'm saying I recognize her," Mr. Whitaker replied. The groom looked at me now with open curiosity, no longer polite distance. "Were you involved in that?" he asked. I met his gaze. I worked on operations during that period. It wasn't confirmation. It wasn't denial. It was enough. My father shifted, discomfort growing. She never mentioned anything like that. "I didn't know you were asking," I said quietly. Mr. Whitaker leaned back, absorbing the moment. His posture straightened slightly, instinct rather than intention. The groom mirrored him unconsciously, shoulders squared, attention sharpened. "You're the woman they talked about," Mr. Whitaker said finally. The sentence settled over the table. My father stared at me, confusion and realization mixing slowly. Around us, the band transitioned into a faster song. Guests clapped. The dance floor filled again. But the space around our table remained still. "I don't know about that," I replied. He nodded, accepting the deflection. "You wouldn't." The groom exhaled slowly. "If that's true, then—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Some thoughts don't need completion." My father cleared his throat. "This is surprising." "Yes," Mr. Whitaker agreed. Silence followed, not awkward but thoughtful. My sister approached the table, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "Everything okay?" she asked, smiling. "Of course," my father said quickly. Mr. Whitaker nodded politely. "Just talking." She looked between us, sensing something but not pressing. "They're about to cut the cake," she said. "You coming?" We all nodded. Chairs shifted. The spell loosened slightly, but the awareness remained. As we stood, Mr. Whitaker moved first, instinctively allowing me space. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but it carried meaning. My father noticed, his brow furrowed, trying to understand why. The cake was wheeled out white and simple. My sister laughed as the knife hovered awkwardly between them. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. The moment felt ordinary again, but under the surface, something had changed. Mr. Whitaker watched quietly, his expression thoughtful. The groom glanced at me once more, respect beginning to replace curiosity. My father stood beside me, silent, his earlier jokes fading in the weight of new understanding. Recognition doesn't arrive with noise. It settles. It shifts posture. It changes the way people hold space. And as the cake was cut, and the room cheered, the realization that had begun at our table continued to spread quietly like light, moving across the floor. The cake was served in neat, careful slices, each plate identical, as if symmetry might hold the evening together. My sister moved from table to table, thanking guests, her smile warm but measured. The groom followed close behind her, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back. They looked exactly like what everyone expected, a beginning uncomplicated and bright. At our table, the shift remained. My father sat quieter now, his shoulders slightly drawn in as if reconsidering the outline he had drawn for me over the years. Mr. Whitaker spoke little, but his posture held a subtle respect that hadn't been there before. It wasn't formal. It was quieter than that, room-making, space-aware. The groom returned first, sliding into his chair. He looked at me carefully, no longer casual. "You really worked on that operation?" he asked, his tone more thoughtful than curious. "I worked on many," I replied. "That one mattered," Mr. Whitaker said softly. My father cleared his throat. "You keep saying that? What exactly happened?" Mr. Whitaker rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced. A convoy needed to move out before a storm closed the corridor. Timing was narrow, routes were compromised. Whoever planned it adjusted everything in real time. He paused. They kept everyone calm. My father glanced at me. "And you're saying she—" "I'm saying the voice sounded like hers," Mr. Whitaker repeated. I let the conversation settle. Memory, I'd learned, carries more weight when allowed to breathe. The groom leaned forward. "Dad never talks about that deployment," he said quietly. "Just that it was complicated." "It was," Mr. Whitaker replied. "We lost contact twice. Confusion spreads quickly when that happens." But the voice stayed steady. No rush, no panic. He looked at me again. She said, "Move in sequence. Don't outrun the plan." I remember thinking, whoever that is, she understands people. The room around us filled with laughter from another table. Someone called for more champagne. The band tuned again, but the space between us held still. My father shifted. "You never mentioned any of this." "I don't usually," I said. "Why not?" "Because it's work." He frowned slightly. "That's more than work." "Sometimes," I replied. Mr. Whitaker nodded. "The best work rarely announces itself." The groom exhaled slowly. "If that was you, then you helped bring our unit home." I didn't respond immediately. The past isn't something you place on a table like an object. It's quieter, carried in small details, radio static headlights and dust voices layered over each other. I did my job, I said. Mr. Whitaker's gaze softened. That's exactly what she said over comms. My father looked between us, confusion giving way to something slower. You were in charge? Planning, I repeated. That sounds like more than paperwork, he murmured. It usually is. Silence settled again. My sister returned, her veil slightly loosened now. You all look serious, she said gently. Just talking, I replied. She smiled at me, her eyes searching. You okay? Yes. She squeezed my shoulder lightly and moved on, trusting the answer. She had always trusted silence more than explanations. My father leaned back, studying me as if seeing something unfamiliar. You've always been calm, he said. It helps. You didn't even react when I introduced you earlier. I didn't need to. He nodded slowly. I thought you didn't care. I did, I said quietly, just not in a loud way. Mr. Whitaker shifted slightly. She didn't sound loud over comms either. Calm carries further. The groom smiled faintly. That makes sense. My father looked down at his hands as if replaying the evening. I said you just went off and joined the military. He exhaled. That sounds small now. It's still true, I replied. But incomplete. Yes. He nodded, absorbing that. The room filled again with movement as guests returned to dancing. My sister laughed near the floor. The lights softened. The night moved forward. Mr. Whitaker lifted his glass slightly, not quite a toast. There were a lot of families waiting that night, he said. Some never knew who made the call. He paused. That's how it should be, I suppose. Names aren't the point, I said. No, he agreed. Outcomes are. The groom looked at me with quiet respect now. Thank you, he said simply. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. He smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I understand something now. My father watched the exchange, the pieces settling slowly. Pride, confusion, and regret mixed in his expression. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, You could have told me. I could have, I agreed, but you never asked. He absorbed that without argument. The band shifted to another song. Guests clapped. The evening continued. But at our table, the story that had never been told finally existed. Quiet, unembellished, carried in the space between recognition and understanding. And my father for the first time began to see the shape of what he had never looked for. The reception hall had grown warmer as the evening settled, in the kind of warmth that comes from too many conversations layered over each other. Laughter rose and fell in waves, glasses clinked, and somewhere near the bar someone told a story loud enough to draw a small circle of listeners. My sister and her husband moved slowly from table to table. Hands intertwined their smiles, tired but genuine. The celebration was continuing exactly as it should. My father stood abruptly. It wasn't dramatic, just deliberate. He adjusted his jacket, then glanced toward me. Walk with me, he said quietly. I nodded. We moved toward the side doors that opened to a small terrace. The air outside was cooler, carrying the faint scent of grass and distant traffic. String lights hung above the patio, their glow soft and steady. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet felt different from the silence we'd shared in years past. This one wasn't avoidance, it was recalibration. You should have told me, he said finally. I leaned against the railing, watching the lights from the parking lot beyond. You never asked. He exhaled slowly. I didn't know there was anything to ask. That's fair. He rubbed his jaw, a habit he had when thinking through something he didn't like. All this time. I thought you were doing paperwork. I was, I said, just not only that. He nodded, absorbing the nuance. And that operation, that man's son. I wasn't alone, I replied. That's not what I mean. He looked at me, really looked as if measuring the years he had simplified. You were responsible. Part of a team. He shook his head slightly. You always do that. You make yourself smaller. I make the work bigger, I corrected gently. The string lights swayed faintly in the breeze. Inside, the music shifted to something slower. Through the glass doors, we could see couples drifting across the dance floor. I joked about you, he said quietly. Yes. I didn't realize. I know. He leaned on the railing beside me, his posture less rigid than usual. You didn't even react. I didn't need to. That must have hurt. I considered that. Not the way you think. I'm used to being misunderstood. It's quieter than anger. He nodded slowly. I always thought you were distant. I was working. That's not the same. No, I agreed, but it can look that way. He looked down at his hands. I was proud when you joined. I just didn't know what it meant. Claire's life was easier to understand. Weddings, jobs, routines. Yours was abstract. I didn't need you to understand, I said. But I should have tried. The admission hung between us. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, like placing something fragile on a table. You taught me discipline, I said. You taught me to keep calm. That helped more than you know. He looked surprised. I did. Yes. He nodded slowly, absorbing the idea that influence doesn't always look like agreement. I still wish I'd asked more. You can now. He smiled faintly. What would I ask? Whatever you're curious about. He considered that. Were you scared? Sometimes. And you sounded calm. That's the job. He exhaled softly. I used to think bravery meant speaking loudly. I'm starting to think it's the opposite. I watched the lights shimmer across the parking lot. Calm lets people breathe. He nodded. That man inside, he respected you. Yes. And I made you sound like you hadn't done anything. You didn't know. That doesn't make it right. No, I agreed, but it makes it human. He looked at me, his expression softer now. I'm proud of you. The words came quietly without ceremony. They settled deeper than anything louder could have. I nodded once. Thank you. He hesitated. I don't know how to talk about the rest, the rank, the responsibility. You don't have to. I want to understand. You'll understand enough. He smiled faintly. You always speak like that, precise. It keeps things clear. We stood there for a moment, the cool air steady around us. Inside, applause rose briefly, then faded. The wedding was continuing, but something between us had shifted. I introduced you wrong, he said finally. You introduced me the way you understood me. I'd like to fix that. You don't have to. I want to. I nodded, then do it in your own way. He straightened slightly, not rigid, just resolved. Come back inside, he said. We walked together toward the doors. As we stepped back into the warmth and music, I noticed something subtle. He slowed slightly, allowing me to enter first. It wasn't formal. It was instinctive. Recognition doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes it's just space. And as we returned to the reception, the distance that had existed for years felt smaller, not erased, but finally understood. When we stepped back into the reception hall, the music had softened into something slower, the kind of song people choose when the night begins to lean toward memory instead of celebration. Couples swayed close together. The lights were dimmer now, the chandeliers glowing like warm embers. My sister sat at the sweetheart table, shoes off, laughing quietly with her husband. The day had settled into that gentle hour when weddings stop performing and begin breathing. My father paused beside me before we returned to the table. His posture was different, not rigid, not uncertain, just thoughtful. He scanned the room once, then nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. We took our seats. Mr. Whitaker glanced up, offering a small, respectful smile. The groom did the same. The conversation around us flowed again, but softer now, as though the evening had learned to listen. A few minutes passed. My father folded his napkin carefully, then set it down. He looked toward the stage where the band was adjusting microphones. The best man had just finished a toast, and the room settled into that pause before the next speaker. My father stood. It wasn't abrupt, it was deliberate calm. He walked toward the stage, speaking quietly to the band leader. The microphone squeaked once, then steadied. Guests turned, expecting another routine toast, perhaps a thank you, perhaps a story about my sister as a child. My sister looked surprised but smiled. "Dad," she whispered. He nodded gently, then faced the room. For a moment he didn't speak. He simply looked at the gathered faces, friends, relatives, strangers, now joined by celebration. When he began, his voice was steady. "I've already had my father of the bride moment," he said, "so I'll keep this short." A few guests chuckled lightly. I realized tonight, he continued, that I introduced someone wrong earlier, And when you introduce someone wrong, you don't fix it quietly, you fix it properly. The room grew still. My sister glanced at me, her expression curious. My hands rested in my lap, calm, waiting. "My oldest daughter is here tonight," he said. I joked that she hadn't done much, that she just went off and joined the military. He paused, letting the words settle. That wasn't fair, not because she needs titles and not because she'd ever mentioned them herself. It wasn't fair because I reduced a life I didn't take the time to understand. The silence deepened. He looked toward me, not dramatically, just honestly. She's spent years doing work that most of us will never see. Quiet work, careful work, the kind that keeps people safe without needing applause. He inhaled slowly. I'm proud of her. Not for any rank, not for any story, just for the calm strength she carries. She makes rooms steadier. I didn't notice that before. I do now. No one clapped immediately. The moment didn't ask for it. It rested quietly like something placed carefully in the center of the room. My sister's eyes filled slightly, her smile soft. The groom nodded, once respectful. Mr. Whitaker lowered his gaze, acknowledging the correction. My father finished simply, "To my daughters, both of them. One beginning a new life tonight and one who's been quietly building hers all along." He set the microphone down and stepped away. The applause that followed was gentle, not loud, but sincere. It spread slowly, table by table, until the room filled with a soft rhythm of hands meeting. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just inclined my head slightly, letting the moment pass through me. When he returned to the table, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He poured himself water, his movements careful but relaxed. My sister reached over and squeezed his hand. The groom smiled warmly. Mr. Whitaker lifted his glass slightly toward me, a silent acknowledgement. The music resumed, conversations returned, but something had shifted, not dramatically, just enough. My father leaned back in his chair, glancing at me once with a quiet expression that carried more than words. The evening moved forward lighter. Later, guests began to leave. Hugs were exchanged, chairs emptied. My sister embraced me tightly. I didn't know she whispered. "You didn't need to," I replied. She smiled. "I'm proud of you anyway." "I know." The groom shook my hand, firm and respectful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." Mr. Whitaker approached last. "You make calm look easy," he said. "It isn't," I replied. He nodded. "That's why it matters." My father stood beside me as we watched them leave. The hall was quieter now, staff clearing glasses, folding chairs. The night had softened into something reflective. "I meant what I said," he told me. "I know." He hesitated. "I'm still learning." "So am I." We stepped outside together. The air was cooler now, the string lights dimming as the venue prepared to close. He walked me to my car, something he hadn't done in years. The gesture was simple, but it carried its own meaning. "Drive safe," he said. "I will." He nodded, then added, "Call when you get back, wherever back is." "I will." I started the engine, the headlights cutting gently across the lot. As I pulled away, I glanced once in the mirror. He stood there, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, watching until I turned the corner. Revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's the moment someone who laughed learns to stand beside you instead. The room doesn't change all at once. It shifts slowly until respect settles where misunderstanding once lived. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who was underestimated or a moment when quiet strength finally spoke, tell me in the comments below. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what this made you think about. We share stories like this every day, stories about family dignity and the calm courage it takes to stand steady. So consider subscribing if you'd like to keep walking this path with us. Let's continue this journey together.